This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook, Chapter 4, Stake Charmer. Dad was an artist, craftsman, and inventor. He was actually a great deal more than that, commanding a squadron of B-24 Liberators during World War II. Beyond modest, he was one of the greatest generation, and, given the desk drawer full of medals he tucked out of sight, probably did more than his share to keep Hitler at bay and freedom an indelible part of American life. He was stationed on the Galapagos Islands for a couple of years during the war and only told me the story twice, being quite shy and horribly embarrassed by the whole affair. It was, in contrast, one of my mother's favorite tales. Dad flew missions off the Air Force Base, and to hear him describe it, the island was a fairly grim place to be stationed. It was very hot and arid, teeming with birds, iguanas, and massive Galapagos tortoises. They also had millions of crabs and a handful of donkeys. There was apparently a bit of downtime between bombing runs, and, with nothing but a dusty mound of dirt before them, they often played soccer or softball to pass the time. One day, midday through a game, my dad needed to visit the bathroom. Beer and sometimes hot dogs were part of any recreation program when off duty on the island, but up on the side of a dusty field, well removed from the barracks, there was no latrine. Being a soldier, he headed for the bushes alongside the improvised ball field. Dad gingerly picked his way through a large field of cactus, the most prevalent landscaping element and the primary diet of the ancient tortoises. No sooner was he out of sight than his crew heard a thrash, followed by a thump and a scream. They rushed up into the cactus patch and were shocked and amused by what they saw. While squatting down to do his business, he was spooked by an iguana, promptly lost his balance, and sat fully onto a large cactus. He shoved both hands backward to the ground to free his skewered butt and groin, only to again realize, in an equally painful instant, that he had jammed his palms full force into yet more large, needle-covered cacti. How is it possible that the giant tortoises managed to eat those things? Several hours were spent in the days ahead on repeated visits to the medic, ass up, as the spiny cactus thorns were painstakingly plucked out, one by one, with tweezers and a pair of pliers. Dad commanded no bomber raids for a time, but we still won the war. He also liked steak, as did my mom. She preferred hers bloody rare, and he liked his medium. One could envision conflict. Over the years, it was always the same. Dad would prep a couple of fillets or ribeyes or New York strips, or maybe a large sirloin. The meat would be laid comfortably on his large wooden cutting board, which was well seasoned with a dark patina from years of juices and blood. With the scotch on the rocks, balanced ever so carefully next to his long grilling fork, he would slide open the patio door and head out into the dark. The crowning touch to our final home edition was a professional grill. Though impressive in size and capabilities, his was not built to impress, but rather to grill. It was the real thing, genuine and fashioned after a familiar commercial-grade unit, but a few miles from our patio. When we moved to Miami in the mid-1950s, we became acquainted with a small burger chain called Royal Castle. It was a knockoff of White Castle, the ubiquitous and quite popular slider stations that peppered New York State and the Midwest with their pure white caricatures of tiny castles. The 1921 brainchild of a Wichita cook and an insurance salesman, White Castle is credited by some foodie historians with being the true originator of the fast food scene years and years before the Golden Arches started their explosive assault on America and the world. Decades later, and oddly still scattered only through the Midwest, Southeast, and New York State, White Castle's 400 or so company-owned stores are dwarfed by the monstrous McDonald's, with over 35,000 and counting. Anyone who has partaken of a sack of White Castle hamburgers realizes that super lean ground beef is not really on the menu. The tasty little gems are very moist, chewy, and oniony, while the word greasy has been used as a disparaging description on occasions over the years. That to me seems a bit harsh. Let's just say that there is enough fat content in the ground beef of a White Castle burger to enable an unencumbered and unassisted slide down one's gullet. Thus, some say the White Castle hamburger is the genesis of the very term itself, slider, and they are probably right. Upton Sinclair's rather bleak and disturbing novel, The Jungle, and its shocking review of meatpacking practices at the turn of the century somewhat tempered Americans' appetite for ground beef in the early 1900s. To combat this aversion and bring them back to the table, the cook and insurance peddler from Wichita created white, shiny porcelain and stainless steel stores staffed by equally tidy and well-scrubbed cooks and counter help, who scurried about in pristine white uniforms. It was all a well-crafted plan to convey cleanliness with nary a suggestion of anything but the freshest of fresh. It worked. Before long, hungry slider fiends stormed the inviting stores to gulp them down a sack at a time. The White Castle cult was born and persists with vigor today, masterfully promoted with just 3 short words: what you crave. There were, before too long, almost as many imitators as the clutch of 30 little sliders that spread across the standard White Castle grill, lovingly steamed, not fried, to perfection. Royal Castle, situated on Old Dixie Highway down the road from our house, was one of those imitators. Shameless in their knockoff of the Wichita Wonder, Royal Castle burgers, in our view, were just as tiny and just as tasty. I used to ride down with Dad on a Saturday evening and order a couple of dozen to take home to my ravenous pack of brothers. We would sit at the linoleum diner counter on bright orange vinyl stools with thick chrome uprights that spun completely around and watch an old grill man cooking up batch after batch of Royal Castles while we sipped cold birch beers. He'd turn them out a dozen at a time on a large flat commercial griddle. The one Dad had installed on our patio looked just the same. Here is how it worked. First, the grillman laid down the tiny patties quickly in rows, as if dealing cards at a neighborhood poker game. They were shipped refrigerated in a low flat box and separated by 3-inch squares of waxed paper. By the time he got the last one down on the hot griddle, the first one was almost done. So thin were the mere chips of ground beef. He would then dab each one with finely minced onion and add a single round slice of sour pickle right on top. A dusting of salt was applied with a squat aluminum shaker. The old guy would next grab a very wide and thin aluminum spatula and slide a dozen fresh bun tops over the sizzling patties in one deft, practiced motion. Then, with his small paper cap at a measured tilt, oddly produced by a subsidiary of White Castle by the millions, and sold at a tidy profit to the impostors. In his ample girth wrapped in a well-used, well-stained apron, he would bend down and retrieve the matching bun bottoms housed in a stainless steel steamer drawer below the grill. He dropped them face up into a low, flat takeaway box. To conclude the process, each bun bottom finally received a small squirt of yellow mustard. As he went about his final prep, the sliders steamed to a perfect conclusion amidst juices of ground beef and sizzling minced onions, all secured by the soft buns on top. I could watch this burger factory for hours. The divine fragrance of those chewy, meaty morsels wrapped in steamed buns was most intoxicating and drove Dad and me insane with hunger. The final and trickiest step was next. With the same large aluminum spatula, the cook would scoop up the dozen cooking patties with buns on top, swivel around, and with a rapid sliding flick, release them all at once onto the waiting bun bottoms. It seemed that they would hover for just an instant in midair before they completed their journey. Rarely did a single slider go awry, to my knowledge. By the time he closed the lid on the glossy orange and white takeaway box, both Dad and I were contemplating just pulling off on the side of the road on the way home and devouring the entire batch of burgers ourselves. I could have easily downed 6 in 12 bites. Before long, I tried to get my first real job at that same royal castle. Alas, at 14, I was not legally able to do so. I remember standing behind the counter next to the grill early on a Saturday morning, talking to the manager. My dad had dropped me off and was waiting in his air-conditioned Lincoln, idling in the shade at the side of the building. The manager was a character. Before he got to the part about me being well underage and therefore unemployable, he recited grand tales of a most colorful life. One story was about how he used to work for the football great Joe Namath as his personal assistant and cook. He even insisted that at that very moment, the same shiny black pants he wore were once Joe's. They were indeed shiny and black. I wasn't sure, but it could have been true. Back to the steak charmer. Dad was always a doer, and his grill was all about utility, another tool in the toolbox to turn out something special. There was both a double grill top, one charcoal and one gas, as well as a large, flat, commercial-grade griddle. With steaks waiting patiently in prep, he would address his grill and the ritual would begin. First, he'd wrestle a large briquettes bag out from inside the metal cupboard beneath the large griddle. A steel rectangular pan was filled to the brim with the jet black nuggets. Next, a heavy dose of mineral spirits or lighter fluid was applied. Finally, a lighted match was followed by a whoomph. Then, with scotch in hand, Dad would shuffle off inside for the allotted 20 minutes while the coals burned down to a soft gray, signaling they were ready to go to work grilling steaks. At the appointed time, he would trundle back out through the sliding glass door and onto the brick patio. He would vigorously work the hot grill with a stiff-bristled, long-handled brush to remove the burned bits from the previous operation. Then he'd stab the fresh meat with his long-handled fork and lay it across the piping hot grill, just so. The steaks would sizzle loudly as they seared, and he would tend to them diligently. With extreme care, he would sip his scotch, check his watch, and occasionally prod. It was a tricky and pressure-filled challenge to grill them to precisely the correct level of doneness, across the full range, from bloody red to well done. For, waiting inside at the shiny mahogany bar right off the kitchen was she whose steak must be properly grilled, my mother. Beyond her obsession with etiquette, regattas, and Yorkshire Terriers, she was also most particular about how her steak was prepared. She would suffer no fools in this regard. If not properly grilled, the grumbling would begin. With a serious grilling miscue, the steak would be flatly rejected. I suspect Dad's scotch was both part of the pleasant ritual as well as a stress management tool for the potential strife to come. In the event, the steak that was served up was overcooked. This was a distinct possibility when the target was only bloody rare. At some point over the years, my dad decided there must be a better way. Challenging and inconsistent grilling and the penalties for falling short were the mother of invention. The steak charmer would soon be born. While tending to a couple of large New York strips one night, Dad had an idea. He had learned over the years that the only real constant in grilling was temperature. The difference between well done and medium rare was always exactly the same number of degrees. One could estimate doneness based on time or tenderness, but these were only a calculated guess since grades of meat, ambient temperature, fat content, and thickness are all variables that govern how fast a piece of meat cooks. The only surefire and consistent way to ensure well done was always well done and not medium well was to take its temperature. A medium steak is precisely 145 degrees, no more, no less. A well-done steak arrives there exactly 10 degrees later. It's physics, meat, and math. Every chef knows this, and that's why we have the meat thermometer. Dad had tried them, several in fact. They worked fine, but in his view, they were hard to read, especially in the low light of outdoor cooking. If one was responsible for multiple cuts of meat across a variety of specifications, it was even more cumbersome and difficult to keep track. Jabbering guests could add further distraction, intensifying the challenge. And there was always the unnerving potential for breakage, adding glass shards and mercury to the meat. He was certain a better way existed, and that a rational, inquisitive mind could locate it. Dad mulled various solutions. In the end, he concluded that rather than constantly checking on the steak, it, when ready, should alert the chef. After all, who knows more about a steak's well-being than the steak itself? There just had to be a way, he thought. Maybe other grillers of meat had the same frustrations, coincident need, and desire to resolve the age-old challenge of wrestling with the condition of undercooked or overdone. He pondered and mulled. He grilled and sipped scotch. He mulled some more. Eureka! One night as he worked his grill, the solution to the doneness dilemma appeared right among the steaks that sizzled before him. It was an entirely mechanical solution, as it had to be, so early the world was in its journey along the path of microprocessors controlling all things. His innovative epiphany was to combine physical elements that, at various temperatures, changed properties, especially from solid to liquid and back again, and made things happen with mechanics in a way that a steak could actually alert the griller when it was properly done. The tinkering began. Soon Dad had gravitated to metals, and more accurately, alloys. He had learned that different types of alloys and blends melted at different temperatures. Silver, gold, lead, platinum, solder, brass, copper, and steel all turned to liquid at unique places up and down the thermometer. That temperature was a fixed number. It never varied. Once cooled, they all then returned to their previous physical states. He surmised that if he could blend the right metals in the right proportions, with some tinkering, he could hit the melt points that corresponded to the full range of a meat's doneness. Solve this mixology puzzle, he thought, and he could build some kind of mechanical device that would respond in the appropriate way when the alloys melted and respond in another way when they became solid once again. Taking it a step further, a solid piece of metal could hold something securely when solid and release it when it melted. The process could be repeated again and again. In simple terms, the change in the physical state of the alloy could operate a switch that, when flipped, could alert a chef. Dad was onto something, and he knew it. As he headed in from the patio to the kitchen that night, properly grilled steaks sizzling on his seasoned cutting board, he stepped with new vigor, stimulated by the possibility of discovery and the thrill of invention. With prototypes under development, our menu shifted to a steady diet of steak, sirloins, New York strips, T-bones, ribeyes, and of course fillets became our staple, the centerpiece of our nightly meal, the core of our daily diet. Refinement continued and progress marched on. Strange but true, before long we became disappointed when we asked Mom what was for dinner and were told it would be steak. Always steak. I craved spaghetti, fish sticks, even chung, king, chow mein. Even begged for them sometimes, but always it was steak. Worse, as the testing continued, we could often not even have our steak prepared to our desired level of doneness. Want a medium rare ribeye? Sorry, we were testing well-done tips that night. It all depended on the prototype under review. To our frustration and dismay, the product development group from the Steak Charmer R&D department had apparently taken over the kitchen. The Steak Charmer was taking form. It had morphed into what looked like a long pointed aluminum probe with a mahogany handle and a plastic light dome poking at its rear above a lever. The temperature-sensitive tips were attached or removed with a twist of a small wrench with an octagonal hole for holding and twisting. The secret to the operation and the heart of the invention was in the patented pointy tips. There was one for each level of doneness, a rare tip, a medium rare tip, a medium tip, and so on. Each was filled with its own special blend of metals in just the right proportions, the patented secret formula. Running through the hollow aluminum tube at the tip was a rod that became the lever as it extended up through the handle and exited with a 90-degree bend. It engaged through a tongue and groove application at the opposite end with a tiny tab in the butt of the tip. This was an internal and hidden design feature. When cool and the alloy was solid, the actuator in the tip could not turn. Twisting the lever and locking it at the end of the handle added tension. It was, in effect, cocked or loaded and ready to release as soon as the alloy melted again. Grab up a steak, any cut, any size, or a roast, or a squab, or even a turkey if desired. Skewer the meat with a steak charmer. Don't be timid or shy. Lay it across the grill. Typically, the chef would sear one side well and turn the meat. Now it was just a waiting game. No guessing, no hoping or praying, and certainly no risk of error or risk of poor grilling results. At precisely the correct temperature that assured the desired doneness, the specially blended alloys in the patented tip of the steak charmer would melt, releasing the ratchet in the tip, which would rapidly twist, thus springing free the lever in the butt of the handle with the pronounced click. The mechanical contraption had just thrown a switch which would, in the end, finally close a small circuit and set a miniature pen light bulb in the handle to blinking. The busy chef would either hear the click or see the blinking bulb and be alerted by the steak. It was ready, grilled to perfection every single time, again and again and again. The steak charmer was a heck of a gizmo in the early 1960s. For the first time in history, America had a steak informing the grill chef in charge, in no uncertain terms, "Sir, I am done." With the steak charmer perfected, production was ramped up aggressively. Parts by the hundreds were ordered from Japan. They sailed in on steamer ships, docking at Port Everglades. When they arrived, my dad would load up the station wagon with new parts and roam across the neighborhood, dropping them off in batches at area homes. A small army of homemakers would sit and watch their soaps, and while their little ones napped or toiled away at school, assemble steak charmers with a simple flathead screwdriver. When he designed the device, he made sure that they were very easy to put together and even easier to take apart, with a single tool all American homes had conveniently sitting in a kitchen drawer, a design and engineering method all but lost among many modern products and most certainly a quaint anachronism today. The assemblers would fill a box and Dad would pick them up. They were paid piecemeal per unit. His probing, pointy gizmo was a hit. Soon, hundreds of gift shops across the nation had a barrel in their aisles filled with the long white tubes with black and red print holding steak charmers. He and his partner, a Mr. Scruggs, sold over 500,000 units within a couple of years. Design and prototype testing complete, back on our dinner menu were Chef Boyardee and banquet TV dinners. Again, Mom was whipping up chicken fricassee, popovers, and spaghetti with meat sauce twice a week. The variety and balance was back. We were eating well again. Before long, Dad's Asian suppliers wanted to increase the lot sizes for parts orders from several hundred to several thousand. Concerned about becoming overextended, he balked. The last thing he wanted was to end up with a garage jammed with thousands of rivets, mahogany handles, patented tips, and blinking pen light bulbs. They wound down production and pulled the plug. Before long, the barrels of steak charmers and gift shops all across the country grew empty, refilled most likely with jumbo, rolled-up posters of Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and the Beatles. Several years ago, following a move back to California, I opened a beaten-up box and, to my shock and delight, discovered a steak charmer. Dad had passed years earlier, but I still had a catch in my throat. It had a medium tip, the level of doneness that best suits my palate. That afternoon, I went to a local butcher and bought the best filet he had. It was a beautiful piece of aged tenderloin, a deep, dark, purply red, almost black. When I got home, I poured a glass of good red wine and fired up the charcoal grill. I sat for about 20 minutes so the coals could become a soft gray. Next, I replaced the single AAA pen light battery with a fresh one by releasing the stainless steel clip and removing the knurled aluminum connector. I slowly cocked the steak charmer. After almost 50 years, I thought it might explode in my hand. The tension lever clicked smoothly into the cock position. I skewered the fillet and placed it on the hot grill. It sizzled and seared. After several minutes, I turned it once and sat back in my chair. The fragrance was a delight and stirred up many a memory of many years long past as I had watched Dad work his magic out on the patio. In a few minutes, I heard a click and watched as the little bulb protruding from the butt of the handle began to blink. I was alerted. The steak was telling me it was perfectly done and ready to enjoy. I am biased, to be sure, but that day I believe I devoured the finest medium fillet I have ever tasted, seared crusty on the outside, yet tender, moist, and pink in the center. Next up is Chapter 5. It's a tale that, even today, sends a chill up my spine. It's called Dumb Luck.